Welcome to 101. I'm Greg Bassey, your host from the Salisbury Independent newspaper. It's a big day here at PAC 14. We're not at PAC 14. We're on the road. We're at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore in beautiful, historic Princess Anne. And we have a returning guest, Marilyn Burkle. Welcome, Marilyn.
Thank you, and thank you for coming to see our fabulous television studio.
This is amazing down here. I'm so jealous because it's a great studio, and it's so relaxed, and it's so professional, and it just feels really good here.
Well then, you are welcome at any point.
Now, we've got some student directors here and camera operators and technicians. Do you want to tell me what's going on here today?
Sure, and in fact, this is not even, people would think, oh, UMES students. No. Every summer we have a television production day camp called Star Power, and our camera operators and director and audio operator and graphics person are all middle school, they're 7th, 8th, and 9th graders from around the community who are here for the week to play with our toys.
That's just amazing. You know, when I went to Wicomico High School in Salisbury, Wicomico Senior High School, we had campus productions with a Sony camera and a Sony Betamax, but we didn't have any technology like that in middle school. There was no way to learn how to do video then.
Well, in fact, I'm not sure how much teaching we're doing. It's more like polishing, because students these days have the opportunity. There's plenty of free software that they can download. And as somebody was saying at lunch today, well, I didn't know exactly how to operate it, but I looked it up on YouTube. So there's a very self-taught group of folks in terms of digital media. We have here, through an advisory board, queried the managers of communication companies in our area of the kinds of equipment that they use, the sorts of software they expect their staff to be proficient in. And so when we built this fabulous studio, we made sure that we were using things that our students, UMES students, would become proficient in, because that advances their career opportunities. If they're going into an interview and say, oh yeah, I know how to use Premiere, I've worked on a Chiron, these are the kinds of terms that will light up a television, I would say news director, but it could be anybody in the production area. And these students have expressed an interest in learning more about it. And we're really, it's fun all the time.
Right.
As a career, it's fun, but in this case, this week is built to be fun. And so you're one of our highlights of the first day.
Well, I saw this morning they produced like a game show, and we see with TikTok and even Zoom, people doing so many things at home with video, but they were able to use the technology to produce a really top-notch type program.
Well, we're lucky that we have 3 proficient technical staff members who think up this stuff before our day camp ever begins and figure out the best way to explain and express and practice. And this week we'll progress to the point where the students are going to create their own movie and use special effects. And we envision, I hope I'm not letting the cat out of the bag here, but the students are going to go to the library and use that as a venue for time travel. And so they can open up a book and go wherever, and then we'll take you through the magic of television special effects to wherever they want to go. And we're going to have a big premiere at the end of the week for their friends and family, and maybe even our university president. We like to make our facility community friendly, and bringing in young people in the summer and their parents and their friends and family lets people see what an amazing facility we have. And maybe it plants a little seed of, oh, maybe I'd like to study digital media at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore.
Yeah, totally. I think it would with these middle schoolers. Absolutely.
Hope so.
You know, I think it's going to be an experience they always remember. But anyway, it's just great to be here, and it's great to have the kids here. I want to talk to you about the UMES students, too, that you deal with, and we want to talk about some media a lot. Where are the students that you deal with at UMES, where do they get their news? What experience do they have with news when they get to you?
Depends on the student. I have students who I would describe as media literate and politically savvy. And those are the kids whose parents made them listen to NPR in the back seat while they were driving off to work, and the kid was in the, still in a, whatever those booster chairs are called. So there are some students who are acutely aware of news and information. Not all of them. And in fact, I don't think it would surprise anybody to know that social media is really the primary source for information. I hesitate to call that news, because you and I think of news as something that has been gathered by a journalist, fact-checked, confirmed by multiple sources, and that's not the kind of information necessarily that people are gathering on social media.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it with my own kids where, I was the editor of a print newspaper, and my kids just would not read the newspaper. They would look at the pictures in the paper, but they wouldn't read it. But they were interested in the news, and they would go and get their laptops and read the digital version of the newspaper rather than the print version. So that platform was just like alien to them. They didn't want to touch it. The first experience I had was my son played football for James M. Bennett, and there was a story about a game that he played in, and I handed him the paper, and he was like, didn't want the paper, and went upstairs and read it on the computer. I mean, that was the way he wanted to read things. He was still interested in that news, but the platform had a great effect on how he consumed the news.
Well, I think that you can apply that probably across any news or information or entertainment source. I mean, even we have a student radio station. Our students really prefer to do podcasts and post them for people to listen to at their leisure. When I was in college, being live on the radio was a big deal.
Right.
I think that music, reading a book, people are, on iPads and not necessarily a physical paper book. So, yeah, we are somewhat dinosaurs, I'd say.
But the need for content is still there. The interest in content is still there. So even those students who might not be reading a paper, they still care about what's going on in the world.
Yeah, and there are plenty of ways to apply the kinds of skills that not only journalists, but other storytellers. And if you use that label broadly, storytelling, it covers a ton of both entertainment and information. And so I think that I think we just have to live with the fact that life has changed.
Right.
And digital media is in fact our future. And if, those physical paper newspapers who fail to see where the rest of the world is headed will end up in trouble.
Right.
And if you watch, boy, now I'm going to get myself in trouble. If you watch morning television, I find that things that I see on Facebook or Twitter have become news stories in the morning broadcasts. And part of me says, look, you got X amount of time, I'd like to know what's happening in the world. I don't really need to see that funny dog who took the UPS package off somebody's front porch and the security camera captured it. But in fact, I would be foolish to think that's just sort of a way to get them into the tent. And if somebody comes because they're entertained in the morning, but in the meantime they learn about the assassination of the Haiti president or the President Biden's negotiations with a bipartisan group of senators over infrastructure. I mean, that's there as well. And I think we probably just have to rationalize to ourselves that if people choose different platforms with alternative methods of delivering information, it's not, the sky is not necessarily falling.
Right. Right. It's interesting you mentioned the morning programs, because I think they've actually driven the changes in television news. It used to be the Today Show would come on at 7 o'clock. You'd have the classic anchor guy, Frank Blair, whoever, who would read the headlines for 5-7 minutes, and then you'd throw it over to the hosts who would interview the celebrities and talk about that kind of stuff. And now you see them, they'll do some news and they'll mix it in, they'll bounce off the news and they bring opinion into it, and they say some wacky stuff, do the Facebook type stuff with it. So it's evolved to that degree. It's kind of the way I think that we socialize and talk as people, but it's not that formal format that I'm used to. So I know, like, okay, I'm getting the news now, and now I'm getting some fluff or something that's not quite news.
I think you're absolutely correct that it used to be more clearly defined. And now I'll get on my soapbox, and that is that when cable news came along and there were 24-hour networks, I can remember when CNN went on the air in 1980, in Washington, people called CNN chicken noodle news. They never thought that there was any need for a 24-hour news network. Well, we've clearly gotten past the idea of, I'm going to give you the important stories at 6 p.m. today, to the egalitarian approach of,
right,
here's the information, take what you want, and look at it when you have time to absorb that information. But the fact that there are these now 3, 4, 5 cable networks, it seems to me that once you put a guy behind a desk with a tie on and he's telling you information, I think decades ago we began this slippery slope of, is this opinion or is this factual news? Because we in a newspaper it was very clear, this is the op-ed page.
Right.
This is the
Newspapers
front
label
page.
these things.
Yeah.
The news is in the front, the real news, world news, state news, local news, and then you've got your style section, you've got your sports, you've got business. So newspapers are always good at labeling things, but even on TV, when you were a news director, you put the hard news in the front, and as the broadcast went on, the news seemed to get a little bit lighter as you went on until you landed with weather and then sports, which you could argue would be the lightest of all news, but still very important to all of us.
Well, if you had an excellent television producer, you wouldn't necessarily have that impression.
Right.
Because each segment ought to have important stuff at the beginning of it. There ought to be a reason for somebody to sit through the commercial.
That's a good point, right.
So that you build it as tiny 5 or 6 minute blocks as if they were their own show, so that it could get lighter at the end of that first segment, and you do what we call a tease for later in the broadcast, and don't miss it because Bennett won today,
Right.
And ideally you build in incentives for people to stay for the entire show, but when it was only a 30-minute broadcast, even that was sort of, okay, this is the weather guy, this is the sports guy. But I'm telling you, when you got this 24-hour monster that needs to be fed,
Right.
you just put people behind the desk and everything becomes news. And I think that's created some of the confusion, is as gentle as I'm going to be about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure how it evolved. If it was one of those things, certainly newspapers and TV stations have been affected financially by the other advertising opportunities on the internet. So resources are down, and I think that changes how things get covered. But I don't know that, it used to be, we used to put stories in the paper that we called boring but important. You kind of had to read them to be a good citizen, whether you wanted to or not. You had to sort of muddle through it because it was important. That way when your tax bill came in the mail, you knew why your taxes had gone up. You had read the stories that led to this, so you wouldn't just call City Hall and go, why did my taxes go up? And the City Hall goes, didn't you read about it in the paper? That kind of stuff. So that has been part of the evolution, but at the same time, I don't know if the readers have driven where we go, or if economics have driven where we go, or if we're just not as good a reporters as we used to be.
To draw the public in?
To draw the public in, to make them, why you need to read this boring but important story.
The phrase I use in my journalism classes is news is the glue that holds a representative democracy together. And in fact, if what you're describing as an informed citizen, you have to have that information. I mean, how do you know who to vote for? How do you know if your tax dollars were spent correctly? What if somebody's taken, money under the table, or they got I better not pick on any particular government, got their government entity to invest in what nobody knew was their brother-in-law's company. I mean, those kinds of things are what good news reporters discover and share. I told the students this morning that I think you have shown a proclivity for journalism if you were the gossip in grade school. Because what were you doing? Trying to find out what was going on and sharing with people what's happening.
Right.
So in some sense of it, reporters are just excellent gossips.
Yeah, when people ask how I got into it, I mean, that's exactly it. I was very curious about things, very nosy. I could not keep a secret, and I could actually had a little bit of ability to write. So I was what they always called the run and tell kid. So the kid would fall off his bicycle. I ran to the mother's house to say, "Little Johnny fell off the bike." You know, I was the guy who delivered that news, and I just carried it on to a profession.
You know, in my high school yearbook, somebody signed it. I'm not going to get the front part right, but it was like so and so invented the telegraph, and Bell invented the telephone, and we've got the teleburk. They'd tell me, and I'd tell others.
So how did you get into it?
Completely accidentally.
Because you tried really hard not to.
Well, at the time that women were selecting careers, I had the option of being a teacher or a nurse. And that was about it. And so a number of women in my family were nurses, and I knew I didn't want to do that. And so I enrolled in a college elementary education program. Thank goodness they put us in a classroom the first semester of our sophomore year. And I had little tiny children, knee-high maybe, and said, yeah, you know what? I don't want to do this. So I went to an English teacher and said, I have no idea what I want to do. And he said, you have a pleasant speaking voice, and they're letting women into everything these days. So you ought to go see my friend Bob Wallace at the TV studio in the building next door and get into that. And I did. I mean, it was just somebody who pointed me in a direction. What I did then, perhaps there was a lot of lucky breaks happening, but at that point, I was in school in northwestern Pennsylvania, and the public radio station in Erie had what was, I think they called it Carousel, and they had an hour from each area college campus produce a show, and we did that 5 days a week. And so I left college with a resume that had NPR experience on it, just sort of accidentally. And then I had worked at the beach the summers I was in college. And when I decided to move here when I graduated, I was naive enough to think that I would just knock on the door of the only television station in town and say, hi, I'm ready to work. And they would say, oh, come on down.
This would be WBOC.
It was almost that easy.
Yeah.
Because there was radio and television at the time, BOC, AM, FM, and TV. And they told me later, the supervising manager had decided he was ready to hire a woman to be on the radio. And I was the first woman after he had made that decision who came in with radio experience. And within about, I'm going to say a week or so after I had talked to Mr. Ward, the guy who was doing night radio got a job in Washington. So he had an opening, and he had a resume sitting on his desk. And the rest is history.
And that was probably like, what, 76?
75.
75, right.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of water under that dam.
Yeah.
I spent the first year as a radio host and then moved into the newsroom. And as we discussed on our first conversation, went to Washington for 8 years, but came back as news director. And I really felt, as I'm sure you do, when you are responsible for a news product in an area where there aren't tons of choices, there's a big responsibility with that.
It's a lot of pressure. It really is, yeah.
And it's a large geographic area. We did 10 counties in 3 states. And the audience, because our community is small and friendly, the audience feels perfectly comfortable calling you up and going, whoa, what
Right.
was she wearing this morning?
Right.
So not only are you talking about the content, but also then the personalities of the people who deliver that content, and then competing pressures out there in the community of what ought to be covered, how we cover things. So it was a lot of responsibility, but I was really very proud to be part of that.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was one of those things. I went to University of Maryland College Park, and there I was trained to understand my community in a way that I could go back, lead a newsroom, and pick the 5 or 6 stories that were going to go on the front page that day. That would be I would determine what my readers needed to know.
The gatekeepers.
The gatekeeper. Now it's not that way. People want to know what they want to know, not what you want them to know. And that's fine. It's because it's all this news is news is news. It's all the same news. But still, that was a big responsibility to make sure that you had a story from Worcester and Wycomico and Somerset and Sussex and your national story. And this is like, okay, if you only have 6 minutes to read, these are the 5 stories that you need to look at. And all that's gone.
I think that there is still the responsibility to select information that the audience needs to know. I agree with you about those boring but important. But the truth is they don't have to be boring. It's how you tell the story.
Right.
You don't tell about the meeting. You tell about the issue they're meeting about.
Right.
And in which case, then you go and get great pictures and you talk to what I always called regular people, real people, the folks who are involved, whose backyards and paychecks and jobs and grocery stores will all be affected, as opposed to the guys sitting behind the table making the decision. Yeah, you report the decision, but that's not how you tell the story, in my opinion.
Right. Now, as someone who watches television now, how do you feel about, I have my feelings about when I look at the Daily Times, and I know most of their troubles are based on economics, but they also produce some really good work a lot of times. What do you see when you look at the local news stations? We're lucky in Salisbury to have 2 television stations.
3.
3, I'm sorry.
You're not counting WRD.
Yeah.
We're not used to that yet.
Yeah. Well, I feel like they're at the beach, but yeah.
Well, there are a couple of things, I think. One is that I wish that there were more emphasis on hiring people who grew up in the community. My boss taught me that it was easier to teach somebody how to do our jobs well than it was to teach somebody the real fabric of a community. You don't really get that in a year or 2. And I always describe our profession, at least broadcast journalism, as a suitcase kind of job. People don't unpack. They're 2 years here, 2 years there, and that's economics. You're not paid real well in a small market, and you're likely to make more if you move to Baltimore. And then you're likely to make more if you move to Washington. And then you're likely to make more if you move to a network. So it's not just, put me on TV. It's, okay, now I'm in my 30s and I want to have a family and I'm going to need to be able to buy a house. And so, yeah, I want to work at a station, progressively increase my income. And that, for people who don't understand that, it may simply be that, let's pick Salisbury, that there are a certain amount of eyeballs that you can reach. And you charge a rate for your commercials based on the number of eyeballs you reach. Well, in Baltimore, there are more eyeballs to reach. So there are more dollars spent to be charged for those eyeballs. And, the larger the city, the more eyeballs, the more money you can charge for your advertising. And so you have more money to have more people in your newsroom, or to pay people in a way that makes them stay longer. That's the first thing I'd say, is that I wish people would put down roots. But I understand why they don't. And then I'd like more of those boring but important, because I think that they can be told well. I don't think they always are told well. And that's, look, we're in a starter market. We're in a place where people begin careers, and that's just the way it is.
Right.
And so, after somebody's here for a year or 2 years or maybe 3 years, now they really have a sense of the community. They dig in, they know what they're doing, they don't make mistakes, hopefully. And so you get a I think, a more sophisticated product. As long as people continue to turn over, and you have them doing Facebook kind of stories,
Right.
you know, I worry a little. I like those boring but important.
You were an on-air person, you were an anchor, you were a reporter, and then you kind of moved into the management thing where you had to nurture people and develop people. What did you enjoy more?
It's funny, my mother could never understand why I would give up an on-air position. And I said, Ma, people are always telling you what to do. I want to be the one who tells them what to do. So I think it was more of a power thing.
Right.
And also the ability to then be able to set that agenda, to determine which stories ought to be covered. I do think what I do here at UMES is very similar to what I did at WBOC, because people are beginning their careers, going through a process of the mechanics of telling a story, the script review. Oh, this word, it's probably not the right one here. That sort of one-on-one coaching, for want of a better word, is what I did in the newsroom and what I do here. So I was never, I don't know, the on-air part, the best part of that was being able to go out and do the stories. You know, meeting people and being in the places where things were happening, as opposed to being back in my office with the, you know, waiting to hear what came in from the field. That's the part that I would suggest that I missed. But the management of young talent, again, is a big responsibility, and I enjoyed that. I also like, you know, if you watch WBOC and you still watch Steve Hammond and you still think he's great, I didn't hire him, but I'm so pleased he stayed. You know, you can look around at the folks who have invested in the community and know, in my opinion, that those are folks you can trust, because they know what they're talking about.
It's really unique to have a situation like Hammond.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And BOC is very lucky for that, and they know that. I guess, you know, you have to make a decision. Do you want to be a big fish in a little pond, or are you comfortable being a little fish in a big pond? And I'm pleased that there are talented people who have selected big fish in a little pond.
So fall will be a little bit normal this year, a little bit more normal this year. Hopefully you work a lot with interns at UMES. Give me a quick idea of what you'll be doing this fall. Well,
you're right that it's been a weird year. Coming out of COVID, I haven't had an intern. I don't mean, and for the viewer's sake, we're not talking about interns who would intern with me. It's me guiding interns into workplaces in the community. And I haven't had an intern in a year and a half because companies weren't comfortable bringing in somebody else, and that's completely understandable. So we're going to have to, I don't want to say rebuild, because I think everybody out there knows that interns can be valuable and are an excellent source of prejudging a potential employee. I mean, that's what I always think of interns as, is you get to take a look at them without having to hire them. Isn't that a luxury?
Right.
So yeah, that's something we got to work on this fall. But I think the most exciting news from my perspective, and here's a scoop, we've just hired a new person. And the way I describe her is to keep saying, she's everything I'm not. And I mean that in the sense of, I'm more traditional, old school broadcasting and communication. She is so cutting edge digital. She writes narratives for gaming, you know, she's the kinds of, she's experimented with artificial intelligence. She does podcasts. She's, you know, it's all where the world is headed and exactly what we've been talking about. And now we're going to have an expert. And I, you know, have played one on TV, but we actually are hiring one. So I'm very excited about that.
Marilyn Burkle, thanks for having me down here today at UMES, this beautiful facility, great floor staff here. Thank you all for everything. And we're just thrilled that we got to talk to you today. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
I'm Greg Bassett from the Salisbury Independent Newspaper, another edition of 101 right here on PAC 14.